Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a great week so far. Welcome to today's webinar. We'll be spending some time talking about Ellucian and Anthology. The name of the webinar today is Anthology After Ellucian. My name is Hope Jacobson. I'm the Vice President of Higher Education, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. I'd like to take a moment and introduce two of our guests today. Greg Tyson, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Hope. So Greg Tyson, I'm an advisor to Higher Ed BPO, one of the sponsors of this webinar. I come to the webinar with over 25 years of higher ed and ed tech experience. I was the CITO at Post University for 7 years and had a wide portfolio of anthology products. We implemented student finance and operations, Nexus CRM. We were a long-term Blackboard customer. We kind of spearheaded some of the integrations between some of those native products as well. Was the CIO at Mercer University, was a Banner customer, as well as a Nexus CRM customer and a Blackboard customer. I worked as a fractional CIO for Ellucian at Fordham and Yeshiva, so I have experience with Ellucian and know that ecosystem quite well. Recently, I was at Anthology, was the VP of Cloud Services, Integrations, and Illuminate. Also worked on a project where we were trying to speed up the implementation through the use of AI. Unfortunately, with the Chapter 11 and the selling of the product, that project was ended. No longer at an Anthology or Ellucian at this point. So I do have experience both from the customer perspective and as well as from the ed tech company perspective. So I've seen both sides of the equation and both sides of the pain. So for those of you that are on the call, as a customer, some of you may know me because I was a reference when I was at Post to many institutions. So hopefully you don't hold that against me. But again, I see both lenses. So thank you, Hope.
Thanks, Greg. Welcome, Andy Smith. Over to you.
Yep. Thanks, Hope. Nice to be here today with everybody. Hope it's nice where you're at watching today. I'm the president of Brook Consulting, and like Greg, I've had a varied career leading technology involving a lot of ERP and a lot of different industries, particularly had the privilege of leading technology in 2 states. I've also had the opportunity to work with probably about a dozen higher ed colleges across the country, some using Anthology, others using other products, and have seen my fair share of the challenges and also working through and seeing the opportunities that come out the other side as people go through their digital transformation journey. And very happy to be here today and talking about this great topic.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Andy. Welcome. All right, so as we all know, Anthology filed for bankruptcy late last year, and their service offerings were split into 3. Ellucian acquired Anthology Student, Finance, and HCM. Incora acquired Reach and the Student Success. And lastly, Blackboard spun off back to being Blackboard, right? So a lot of the details of that situation are already out there, but really what we're here to talk about today is how this is affecting institutions using the Anthology products. So let's dive a little bit deeper and really tap into, Greg and Andy, your expertise and experience here. Greg, one of the questions I wanted to present today, and let's talk about how this is different from what I would consider a normal vendor acquisition or transition. So I know that they vary in different capacities, but how is this one different from perhaps others you've seen out there?
Yeah, so when one vendor acquires another vendor, you kind of have to ask yourself the question is why? What is their motivation? So if it's a vendor looking to expand their footprint, so for example, Anthology acquired Blackboard, it was not a competitive product to any Anthology's products, but they were expanding their footprint. And the Anthology was, the power of together. We're going to acquire and build out this ecosystem. So that's a strategy. When a competitor acquires a vendor, another competitor, in this case, Ellucian acquiring Anthology, then some immediate questions come to mind. Is there product overlap between Anthology Student, Colleague, and Banner? What is the long-term investment? Since in this case now, I think Ellucian has 5 SIS. And then what's the strategy with Anthology Student? The SIS, is it maintain or sunset? roll the features into one of the other products? I think these are all valid questions that you want to ask yourself, when you have conversations. If you're going to the Ellucian conference, questions that you want to ask. Prior to the Chapter 11, I think the Anthology's roadmap was already somewhat destabilized. The company was beginning to consolidate, trying to become more efficient. So roadmap, staffing, commitments were already in a state of flux. And then you have the Chapter 11 and the transfer, and you're seeing some additional flux going on. Again, there are questions and things that you want to be concerned about. Ellucian initially primary responsibility was to the court because they were the winning bidder. So they had to satisfy all of the court conditions, which they did, obviously. And the other thing that you need to think about as well is we're seeing a consolidation in the industry. So when you have two big vendors consolidate like this, it's going to begin to put pressure on the pricing in the marketplace, meaning the competition is less. So your flexibility and you may see costs go up or you may not, but something to be aware of. Also, Anthology was trying to innovate. And obviously, Ellucian with Banner and Ellucian Student are trying to innovate. But if you don't have that innovation competition, does it ultimately stifle competition across the marketplace? So these are all things I think you need to be concerned with and why it's different. So, if it had been a non-competitor acquiring them, I think you would have seen the product grow and investment. In the scenario where a competitor, you have to ask why and what's happening in that case.
Greg, you're spot on. Thank you for that response. Andy, for colleges who are in mid-implementation, meaning they haven't yet gone live with Anthology Student, but they're getting ready to, maybe they're in user acceptance testing, or maybe they're in, some phase leading up to, what does it mean for them right now?
I think it's a conundrum, as Greg said, and I think Greg's answer is good in the sense of it's not an answer so much as a series of questions. And Ellucian, I think in bankruptcy, if you follow how bankruptcies work, I didn't share that I was a reformed lawyer, so hopefully people won't hate me for saying this, but bankruptcies of technology companies are particularly tricky because the ability of a company that is going to acquire, in the case of Ellucian or Incora, coming and picking up pieces of what was Anthology's intellectual property, their stack, they don't get to go in and look very deeply under the hood. They don't get to go in and look at all, because if they end up not winning the bankruptcy, then you couldn't share or divulge things that would give them a competitive advantage over those who did. So if you're in Ellucian's shoes, it's pretty tricky, right? So they think they know Anthology from their market intelligence and their competition against them and FOAs and all the ways they collect information, but they don't really know what they get. And I believe, if we think about bankruptcy, we're probably in about the 90-day period after the sale effectively. I think they're still figuring it out. So a lot of the answers to the questions that Greg posed, I don't think are well known. You don't know the value of the IP you get. You may think you do. And then once you start digging into it and understanding it, it is at that point you have better understanding. And I think I say that as a precursor to the core of your question. If you're in the middle of implementation, you get it's a tricky thing. It's a huge investment, and to even be at any phase, whether you're down close to the end at UAT, or maybe you've just gone live, or even if you're in the middle of doing ETLs and data transformation, you've already made a tremendous investment. I don't mean economic, I mean people investment. And your people are probably in the middle of it. Now there's this big uncertainty. I think what you do know in that case, though, is Ellucian's going to be forthright about their path forward. They're going to have to be, because they got a lot of people who want to know where they're at. What they've said, I think, so far publicly is what you'd expect. We bought the product. We're not going to shut it down and kick everybody to the curb and wish them the best. That's bad for their brand. It's bad for the customer base. And I think they want people to see that Ellucian is the kind of place or kind of partner they can work with. So I think, if you're in implementation, particularly in implementation where you are not as invested as, say, somebody who's in the optimization phase of the product, I think you got to look long and hard. And I think really the focus of the question for you then is about, in most cases, you're going to have to assume there's going to be a there when you're done. The questions that Greg posed are ones you want to know about the long term, but you got to look at where your people are at and what it means to go backwards. And that's very unique to the circumstances of somebody who's in flight at that moment. The closer you are to the end, my personal belief, and without any particular facts, is you're almost better pushing over the end, because you've made such an investment from a people standpoint, and going backwards is often very difficult in terms of starting over on the team.
And let me just add one more thing, Hope, too, is that I managed 2 shared service solutions, Integrations and Illuminate, which was their data warehouse solution. And we were going down the path with those were serving all of the products, not just Student, not just Blackboard, not just Reach. And so as they split up the companies, each company got intellectual property rights to each of those efforts. But are they each going to move them forward, or is Ellucian going to move it forward, and the other ones are going to stall them or stop them? Again, I think to Andy's point is Ellucian is still trying to figure all that out.
Right.
There is conversation going on, between the previous anthology products to figure out those components. But we spent a lot of time when I was there putting things together as a shared solution, and now it's you tearing them back apart. And so I think they're working through the mechanics. And Danny's point is, you don't do all of that due diligence during pre-sale. You just know you have to do it, but nobody has the technical materials until it lands in your lap. And I've been on the receiving end in different companies where, as being the lead technical person, I find out when it's assigned to me, and you've got to figure it out. And so I think you see a lot of that going on here right now. And they will, but it adds a level of risk if you're relying on any of these products or services. So I think.
But it also means it's not moving fast. This is a slow moving learning and digestion that's going to happen, I think, for some time, which is good. I think it gives everybody space or time effectively to consider. And we're going to talk more, I think, about some of those timelines here coming up.
Yeah, and Andy, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that was one of the things that came to my mind, right? These are complex. There's not a lot of answers around them right now. And so, it's hard not to say or make a rash decision, right? But there are a series of questions and things that you can be talking about at your institutions with Ellucian and all of these things, and know that it might not necessarily be a quick decision, because there are tremendous impacts on all sides of the house, from staff, people, project fatigue, to going through the whole RFP process again, et cetera. So, allowing and having that space to evolve here as Ellucian is also figuring these things out and sharing them is probably important as well.
And there's strength in numbers. So when you go to the conference, if you expressed your interest in various aspects of what you're hearing, that will encourage Ellucian and their product management teams to maybe move in a direction versus another. They might be making assumptions that are incorrect because they've not had that full engagement with their customers.
Yeah,
which is what the conference is about, right? So we encourage you to truly engage with them at the conference.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So I know we're probably maybe triggering some questions that you guys may have in your mind. Please feel free to go ahead and put them in the questions chat bot. And at the end, we will take a few moments and answer a few of those questions. So we'll have some time at the end to answer them, but feel free to go ahead and put them in there now. So we've talked about, what happened and had some really great conversations there. Let's talk about where we're at now, where Ellucian, where Anthology is at now, right? We know that at this moment in time, Ellucian is still continuing to look at the product. They have committed to keeping the lights on. But as we talked about in the earlier segment, don't make rash decisions, but don't move too slow, right? So what should the colleges be thinking about, in their plan and as they're planning for the future? Greg, how do institutions, or what recommendations do you have for them to start assessing their current risk profiles today?
Yeah, I was thinking about this in depth, over the last couple of weeks, and really not every customer is the same, and the risk exposure is not the same.
Right.
So I think, I started to put together a matrix of risk assessment here. And so, the easy one is, where are you in your contract life cycle, right? If your renewal's up in next year, your exposure and risk is probably a lot higher than if you just signed a renewal before the Chapter 11 and you've got 3 or 4 years. As I mentioned before, the pricing sensitivity, could be up in the air, right? You don't have, in a year, you can't make a decision to move off Anthology Student. So I think your risk exposure is heavily dependent on where you are in the contract. The other piece to think about is your business your business model. If you're a traditional semester or term-based institution, you have a lot of choices out there, right? If you're a non-traditional, non-term daily starts, there aren't too many choices, so that enters into a different kind of risk. The last piece is, if you've built your ecosystem on campus where Anthology Student was the center of the hub, and you've got all the other products flowing data back and forth, and let's say your student information system is a system of record, that's a huge dependency. And all of your integrations are built around that as well. So, you start to build that matrix of, here's our ecosystem, contract, our operating model, our architecture, and you can start to score it. And I was, again, like I said, I was playing with a spreadsheet the other day and started to come up with a scoring mechanism to basically help somebody determine their risk. So map your renewal horizon, do an inventory of all your customizations and all your integrations. Who are your critical vendors out there and who you integrate with? Do they already have a relationship with Ellucian? Right? If they don't, because Ellucian, they may need to go become an Ellucian partner in order to support you appropriately. Do you have internal resources that know the Anthology SIS well from a functional perspective, or were you relying on Anthology to provide that? Anthology may not be able to provide that resource any longer, or Ellucian might not be able to provide you that resource. So that's where you're partners. If you don't have the resources on staff that know the SIS well, go find a partner like Brook that does know it, right? Because that could fade away over time with this merger. And then be thinking on a 3 to 5 year digital strategy. How does this fit into that? So those are all things, and like I said, that's where that matrix, you could probably do it yourself as well. We could help you if you like, but come up with that matrix of contract, my operating model, and my data strategy and my integration strategy, right? Because that will help you. You can risk score that, and that's whether But I don't think you'll come up with anything or a scenario where you need to start something on the worst case scenario, but don't panic. I think that's the message.
Yeah, start peeling those things apart to understand where your risks lie, right? Yeah. And what might work for your institution. 100%, Greg. Andy, how do CIOs communicate something like this to presidents, to their boards, to members of the staff and the community, within their ecosystem? What recommendations do you have for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not quite like crisis management, right? Those for many organizations are well-trod paths, right? Like a data breach, or how that's going to play itself out, and it tends to be very intense. But there is some commonality in those scenarios to this. The trick right now for communicating, there's a couple of considerations, but right now the trick is, what do you say? Because there's not a lot of certainty, right? Greg's talking about risk assessments and how you can maybe quasi quantify it for yourself. You're looking out at some time horizon. How do you go back to tell people something concrete? it's not generally particularly useful to be like, wow, it's all up in the air and we'll get back to you in a year while we're at it. So I think the messaging can be tricky in that way. But I think the solid part of it is in the words that we've heard from Ellucian, right? And our slang for it, the slang I use, is they're going to keep the lights on. They're going to give regulatory updates. I think we're going to find that the Ellucian Live, that there are actually product enhancements still coming. And, you know, we know from customers that we work with, they continue to be committed to bug fixes and other things that are still in flight. So there has been no, I would say, abrogation of the promises that Anthology made that they inherited, that they're moving forward with. So I think to Greg's point, which is probably the central message, is that is nothing to panic about. There's nothing to panic about. And frankly, for most colleges that have made substantial investments in people, time, organizational energy, data migrations, all those things, maybe you've done something particularly special or automate or have, an investment in over and above just having the SIS. You got to look at what your time horizons are and how important those are. So I think communicating that is, we're not in a hurry. Make sure that when you talk to people, you're pretty clear about it's going to be murky for a while, but the good news is today and for the foreseeable future, there's not a lot changing in terms of your day-to-day. So that leads then to a larger context of strategy, which is always an option. Boards, internal stakeholders, leadership teams are always looking at how technology is changing. So, when you ask the question, what's the role of a CIO in communicating to that? One is don't panic. We're going to talk about facts that we know. And we're also going to talk about what the market looks like here. Greg made a great point. There's not a lot of players in this space that are larger and mature. We've been blessed, and Hope and I, in our experience, to see a number of vendors and how they're performing. And it's a thin market. You'd think it's big, and there's some big names and big players in it, but even the performance of some of those other players are not always quite what you'd expect them to be or what you'd hope. So the tendency to not allow people to go to a place where the grass is always greener. If we were always on that product over there, all our woes would be solved. Particularly those who've been through an implementation in living memory. It's getting there is sometimes worse than when you get there. And frankly, there's no nirvana. And that's true. Greg would agree, and I know you would, Hope, from your past experience in the banking world. There's no good standing up of a large enterprise grade product. Takes years to get stable. So I think the communication is, look, if things are working, that we're having our needs met, either we have access to Anthology resources, either directly from Ellucian or through partners like Brook or Higher Ed BPO, where there are people who have the knowledge and the skills who can help us continue to innovate or continue to leverage the platform and do all the good things. I think those tell people that take your time and look to the future, because those marketplaces, Greg and I were having a discussion just the other day about AI. I know AI is going to solve world hunger and give us all universal basic income and all those things. But the reality is, if you think about what Anthology's journey was of taking legacy product, having it redeveloped into a SaaS first product, right? That's a big transition. Imagine doing that now with a team of offshore developers that are not only inexpensive, but skilled in using Claude. So I think the market's going to move pretty fast in the next couple of years, and you're going to see many opportunities as well. So as a technologist talking to my leadership team and to others, I think it's, make sure you take space, make sure you're watchful and thinking about where you're at. If you're not burdened with problems and some kind of pressure to move, hedging your bets and watching this market now in ed tech evolve, it's a great time to watch. And if you're stable, take your time.
I would just add, as long as you're not having problems with your institution, your leadership is probably not going to be all over your case. But so, go back and reaffirm your communications channels now that it's Ellucian. When you had an issue or need to address something or give your input, are those channels still in place and do they work? Mm-hmm. Don't wait until you have a problem. And so I think that will give you, we'll call it stabilize. Just make sure that that whole ecosystem and your communication strategy is stabilized in the transition. And pass that message on to your leadership that it's all business as usual, which is what Ellucian says, and they're talking about from supporting the product and it running in cloud, but is all of the other ecosystem there, trust but verify, and reach out to them and see if it still works before you need it.
For sure. You guys talked about so much, it's almost hard for me to pull out the key components in each of the things that you guys said. But, basically in my head, I'll wrap it with take your time, right? Think about the future, where you want to go, what's right for your institution, do your risk assessment, know where your risks lie, right? And then, be proactive in the sense of knowing who your CRMs are, knowing who you're supposed to reach out to in case there's a problem, right? One of the things that came across my mind, as we were just having this conversation is, whoa, now we've got integrations, right? Integrations between Reach that now sits within Quora and Anthology Student. What does that look like, right? And that's where understanding and being proactive and saying, hey, is this escalation path still the place where I need to be, right? Is it still the right contact? Am I still reaching out and doing those kinds of things?
And to Indy's point before is a lot of the people that were at Anthology that did that work are elsewhere and are available, right? For Dear Brook, higher ed BPO was founded by folks that came out of professional services in Anthology. So it's not like the knowledge has gone away, it's just shifted.
That's right.
And so it's just a matter of once you do your assessment, do we need to maintain that knowledge if we don't have it internally? And again, these are all things that you want to communicate to your leadership, to your administration, gives them a peace of mind that it's just not, vaporized.
Well, it's how you communicate, right, Greg? Right? In a place of uncertainty, it's hard to speak with fact-based information, right? Because there's a lot of unknowns still. But what you can do is you can understand where your institution sits, what its risk tolerance is, where their staff and people sit, and the morale of your college. And those are the things really that you can put your time and energy into now, focusing on, so you're able to better respond as more fact-based information comes out with Ellucian.
Exactly.
You're wrapping us hope, but what you both said is worth saying. Part of, because my question was, well, what do you as a CIO communicate? Yeah. Anybody who's managed or led knows that it's always good to come with solutions, not come with fear, not come with, well, I guess we just don't know. I mean, that's the truth of what it is. But right. Saying, I have confidence the people that we've worked with at Anthology are still there. Right. And they don't appear to be going anywhere. And I've talked to them and I know them. And that's great news for us, for what we need to give us that space to make our decisions on our time, not someone else's time. Or I've identified those people, but I have a partner who is going to bring them if we need them. And we've got that lined up. So that's not to placate people, but that's the utter truth, right? The resources continue to be there. And it's true, we're focused on Anthology Student, Ellucian. But it's true within Quora too. And Quora is bullish about its future. They're looking to rule the world and take over from other CRMs. So, that's good news. It's good news that there's energy and investment there, and just knowing those people, as Greg said, making sure you stay close to them, check in on them, see what their vibe is, get the truth. You'll know where you're at and how you can mitigate. So, sorry, I hope I didn't mean to go backwards.
No, it's absolutely perfect, Andy. I appreciate that. We've kind of dabbled a little bit in this space, talking about the path forward, right? And we've just spent probably quite a bit of time talking about the things that we can do now and identifying what should their path forward be, right? And so when we're looking at how do leaders evaluate that path, Greg, we talked a little earlier about the risk assessment. We've talked about meeting their CRMs and making sure there's the path there, what does the contracts look like? But outside of the things we've already spoke about, like what else should leaders be looking at to evaluate and understand which path is right for them?
Well, I think it's just figure out the path. So, again, my back of the envelope paths are stabilize and stay. And Andy and I have talked about this is stabilize and hedge, right? So, and then explore and migrate. So depending on where your contract is, if you're in implementation, if you're a quarter of the way into implementation versus a week away from launching, it's a very different decision.
Mm-hmm.
And if your go live is 3 years away, you're going to have a different conversation internally, right? And so look at your timeline. Look at your ecosystem. Look at your cost. I think those are all part of your decision. So if you start thinking about what kind of institution are you, and how customized are you, how unique is your business model, and you picked Anthology because it had that flexibility.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so I think that will start to guide. If you understand your problem statement, it will start to guide your path forward, I believe. I don't know, Andy, if you think the same thing, but
yeah, I think those broad strokes, Greg, you're absolutely right. Those are the kind of broad places. I think the one of quickly migrating, like, it's happened, and I've got some short runway that I ought to go and I should just get going and moving on. I think it may be a little different, as you pointed out, that there are legacy customers that we call Anthology, but we're really Campus Nexus on-prem, older, non-SaaS products. They're in a little bit of a different, I'd say, context than folks that are in the SaaS platforms, because they were probably needing to move anyway. So for them, it may be a different kind of thinking, like, well, maybe we start that journey now. Because frankly, even Anthology, I think you've mentioned, Greg, they weren't very excited about leaving those on-prem people on-prem. We want to be in the cloud. Most software companies today don't want to stay with on-prem because you get into these technological backwaters, are difficult to sustain. They're not economically, beneficial to the software developers usually in that space. We want to get people up in the cloud. So I think that's an important consideration as well when you look at it. But it seems to me, it's hard for me to imagine circumstances in the abstract that are common. There will be exceptions to prove the rule where, my renewal's just around the corner and I'm going to bail, because that you got to pick right. You got to know what you're going to go get. You got to know what you're looking for. And again, I'm bullish on the evolution of the SIS EdTech ecosystem. You don't want to be hasty, not unless you're pressured, and being on-prem might be that example.
But to your point, Andy, if you are up for renewal, Ellucian's going to try to get you to sign a 5-year renewal, right? With some language in there to give them some flexibility, but you sign a 1 or 2 year renewal to give yourself more flexibility, and they may jack up your price a little bit. But I think that's part of the assessment, right?
Yeah, you got to know where you're at on that. I think that's true. That's true. And, we see when we've worked with colleges on the front end of getting contracts, hopefully somebody was forward looking and said, hey, let's give ourselves a 2 or 3 year window in which we can go through a renewal cycle if you get to bite off on automated renewals or the like. Because it takes a while, right? It's like a year to shop, a year to do it at minimum, maybe 2 years to do it. It's for larger, more complex institutions, that's for sure. Smaller ones can go quicker, but
yeah,
you don't ever want to go fast in this, even if you're on-prem and really small and simple and not technologically maybe as invested. It's just hard. You don't want to move with, you want to move with speed, but not haste, as the saying goes.
Yeah, know that phrase well, Mr. Smith. All right. Any other last things to add, Greg and Andy, before we wrap up and head to our Q&A?
I just was it Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Don't panic, or whatever. I get that quote right. Don't panic. I think that's the key, and being an operations person, always doing risk assessment. I only get worried if I don't understand the risk, because if I understand the risk, I can begin to mitigate the risk. And I think that's the key. And when I talk to various folks, in some cases, people understand the risk very well and have come up with some strategies. You know, if they have outages, even when it was Anthology, and if they had an outage, they had clear ways to recover from an outage where they didn't lose data. The institutions that were doing, online registration continuously, they couldn't lose a minute without losing registrations, right? So, look at your ecosystem, look at what your tolerances for pain or things are, and make sure you're mitigating those. And like I said, if you don't have the resources on staff, there are a lot of resources out there. I would try to leverage some external resources. I think you're going to see less and less support or the ability for Anthology. Anthology was stretched pretty thin before all this occurred in professional services to respond real time to real needs. There was a bit of they didn't have a deep bench to grab resources. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just going to that's gotten worse, will continue to get worse. I mean, they can do it, but it might be 6 months or a year away. You want to add a new program, a new campus, and you need their help. There could be some time frame or lag in that doesn't meet your business needs. Mm-hmm. And that's where part of the risk mitigation is understand the partners that are out there that can do this work as well. And I think Ellucian would tell you the same thing, is we can't do it all. And many SIS vendors build a partnership ecosystem because they realize they can't be as responsive as quickly as universities are asking for, because they can't afford to keep a deep bench.
Yeah, I think that's true.
All appropriate. Mm-hmm.
I just have one parting thought, because I've heard it before talking to some of our customers. I know Greg and I have talked about it from before. Is this idea that one of the Anthology together it was one thing, right? One team, one fight, one product. But what we know, and you figure it out pretty quick, is that what Ancora now owns, particularly the Reach platform, the Microsoft Dynamics 365 CE based CRM, was never one system, right? It's all in the Microsoft ecosystem. There were a lot of technological alignments there, but it was integrated effectively to the SIS. And I think, one of the things that I've learned in working with the former Anthology team is those were very different products. And because they're very different products, even though it was in one company, there were different groups of people, and there were some different subcultures, and there were different challenges, and they worked hard at the integration. And so some people say, well, now I bought it, just to have this one thing that was all hooked up together. It's all still hooked up together, I think, is the trick. And I think the people that own from talking to folks at Ellucian, from talking to folks at Ancora, my experience is they're all still committed to that because it makes economic sense for them. They're all committed to making it continue to work. So again, in that risk calculus standpoint, or if it may see superficially, you might be like, oh, it's all blown up and fragmented, but what's your choice? You're going to go buy Slate or something like that and integrate it. So it's not different. I think you still got teams that know who to call and know who to work with. And I think that also continues to provide a lot of comfort, again, as you look to the future and evaluate your options and pick your timing, assuming you can. So that was my parting thought.
Excellent, Andy. Thank you very much. I think today has been a really productive conversation, and I thank the both of you for joining me here and allowing me to kind of pick your brain a little bit with some of these really, really challenging situations that a lot of people are faced with, and the uncertainty certainly, adds to that mix of emotion and decision making and all those fun things. I'd like to give us a moment. We have a few questions that are out there from the audience. If you guys have space and time and can answer just a couple of questions for us. One of the questions that is out there is, I'm not really hearing a whole lot about this on my college campus. Like, what should I be doing? Do you guys have any advice there? Any guidance you can give?
Yeah, I would ask your CSM to come to the campus and present to your administrative executive team. Yeah. Instead of you trying to relate what they're telling you, I would have the CSM or representative from Ellucian / Anthology Student come out and let them bring the slides and present it. And they'll do it. I mean, part of the CSM's responsibility is to make the rounds, and they're probably getting themselves organized. I would assume their caseload of universities is shifting a bit. But, if they can't do it tomorrow, they could do it, just get it scheduled. But that's pretty common for most vendors. I would get them on campus.
Excellent.
I think that's a great way, particularly for those that plug in at that level with them, and you could always do a lunch and learn. I think Ellucian Live is going to be a great place to get information, whether you're there directly or your friends and family are there, and you're, drawing back kind of the messages there. I think if you're a senior person, I know I've made the rounds with some presidents to say, call up the senior leaders at Ellucian and Cora and, talk about what they enjoyed about the relationship with Anthology, what they didn't like about that relationship, and wonder with them what to expect. But if you're down in kind of the rank and file, I would go back to the communications point that I made. And then, if you're a president, maybe listening or thinking about this, it's like, well, what are they wondering? And go back to the point I made. There's nothing much to tell them, right? We don't know. We don't have certainty, but sometimes that message is good to share. Like, we're watching carefully. We're evaluating. We're going to use Greg's risk matrix to figure out our options. But, we're watching it, but there's nothing to fear about, right? We're going to be watching the market. We're going to be watching our partner. We're going to make sure that our students are served and that staff are going to be supported. And if you're down there and they haven't heard that message, it's probably worth getting those reassuring words out and letting them know that there's not more certainty, because there isn't more, for all the reasons I think we started this session talking about. And just be transparent with them and let them know that you are paying attention. If you're at the senior level, and if you're down below, have patience, have tremendous patience, because there are a lot of people who are watching, and we all want the same answers, but they come on their own time, unfortunately.
That's great, Andy. Thank you. You hit on sort of another question that came out over the chat here is, people are going to eLive, right? What recommendations do you have for those who are attending eLive, and who should they meet with? What conversations should they be having?
Maybe you can confirm this. Is there not a Anthology Student track at eLive?
Yeah. There is absolutely an Anthology Student track at eLive this year.
That's the place. I think you really leverage that. I think you're going to have the product management team present at that track. You'll have some of the sales, some of the CSM support leads there. I think that's a good place to start. And then to Andy's point is, if you are at the president level or, VP level at your institution, you can schedule one-on-one with some of the executives from Ellucian. They're usually, they're quite available and willing to do that sort of thing, especially after this sort of event. I think
I was just going to say that's like the one time where you can meet with virtually anybody, you want to, because that's why they're there. You have their undivided attention. And so, there was another comment that came through as a question here talking about, I'm struggling to get my renewal solidified and the terms and things like that. Like, those things are excellent points of contacts to have a one-on-one session with folks at the eLive conference. Like, go direct, sit down, get to know them, right? Have those very frank conversations. It's easy to, as they're trying to figure things out, let the days, the weeks slide because they're still trying to figure it out. This is an opportunity for you to sit face to face with them and have a very honest conversation. So I would encourage, any of you to take time, make the time, if you're at eLive, to go introduce yourself, have those conversations, and really sit and pull it apart and make some contacts.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the beauty of any of these product conferences is, by and large, the host of the event wants you to meet their people and have those relationships and get your questions answered. That's how you bind people together, through relationships. So they want to see that. I've always been pleasantly surprised, I think, and I think it's generalized, particularly with the folks at Anthology, the former anthologists, who I know a number are going to be there, particularly for the anthology track. They're honest people in those cases. You know, if you have a relationship with them, you can get some honest answers from them, and I think it's good to have it. And the only thing else I would add to that is but be patient, because they may not know, and if you come in there kind of cynical, like, oh, they're just hiding something from me, I don't know, for the reasons we talked about in many cases, most cases. And the last thing I'd say, I think be curious about what Ellucian's got. You may have been, depends on when your institution went shopping last, and they can be pretty salesy, but they're there to show you something. And it's good to see. It doesn't mean that that's, sign the dotted line like buying a car in the dealership on the first day you go out. I don't think it's that kind of moment, but it'll be interesting to see, because everybody's trying to innovate. And if you're a company like Ellucian, even though you're the big dog in the market in many respects, there are a lot of people wanting to come eat your lunch. And so they have a compulsion, I think, to move forward in the market. And so it's, a chance to break some bread and rebuild, or solidify relationships you may have had at Anthology with those same people, but also spread your wings a little bit and see what's out there, because you may want to know in the not so distant future, right?
Yeah, Andy, thank you. All great advice. As we're approaching the time nearing our end here, I really don't want to take up too much of your time. But thanks again to both of you, Greg and Andy, for being here today. More importantly, I want to thank everybody who took a few moments out of their day to spend time here with us today. We know it's uncertain times. We know it's frustrating. We know it's hard. We know sometimes having patience isn't the easiest thing in the world, but what we have here is an opportunity, right, to pause, think, plan, and come up with a strategy at each of your institutions that's going to best suit you. Andy, Greg, and I are available for any questions you may have. If you need a little more context, or you just have a little sidebar conversation, or, hey, Hope, I got a quick question for you, or, hey, Greg, you mentioned this, but I'd like a little bit more information, or, anything that you may have, our contact information is at the bottom or on the screen here. So I do encourage you to reach out should you have any questions. And, everybody, thank you so much for spending some time with us this afternoon. I really appreciate it. We'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you very much, Hope.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.